Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the legendary Prescott Hill Climb. This is our last competition day of the year, sad to say, and even sadder, the weather has been awful this weekend. In fact, the nearby town of Winchcombe, just down the road, got on the national news this morning for having had 100 millimetres of rain yesterday. That's 4 inches of rain. So the place is fairly damp, you could say. But nevertheless, we're going to have an afternoon of hill climbing at this wonderful hill. One consequence of the rain is that a number of competitors have been obliged to pull out because the conditions simply don't suit their cars. They're not going to risk an expensive car on a non-championship hill climb event. But we've had a number of events at Prescott since the July lifting of the COVID lockdown, and our team in the office have worked wonders arranging not only some competitive hill climbs, which you might have watched on the live stream, but also some non-competitive social events, and they've done a fantastic job, so congratulations to them. This afternoon we've got the final rounds of 3 championships: the Hennies Cider Classic Speed Championship for 3 classes of classic cars. We've got the New Barn Interclub License Speed Championship, and I'll explain what an interclub license is in due course. And Bugatti Owners Club's own championship comes to a conclusion this afternoon. If you haven't seen Prescott before, welcome if you're in this country, and welcome also if you're somewhere around the world. It's always a joy to get comments from all over the place. We had a couple of nice people commenting from Melbourne, Australia yesterday, so do keep the comments coming and we'll put as many as we can up on the screen. Bugatti Owners Club celebrated its 90th year last year, and you might have seen on YouTube and elsewhere a 38-minute video that the club produced celebrating its 90th year. We had some wonderful celebrations last year, including getting 90 Bugattis here for our celebration weekend, and to see the convoy of 90 or so Bugattis up the hill and then parking on the grass at Ettores was really memorable. Prescott itself was discovered by the Vintage Sports Car Club in 1937. They saw that the estate, the whole Prescott estate, was on the market, and saw that the drive up to the house, big house at the top of the hill, would make a perfect hill climb. But unfortunately for them, the Vintage Sports Car Club couldn't afford to buy the estate. Luckily, the Bugatti Owners Club, who at the time were flush with funds, stepped in, bought the estate, and in an incredibly short time had tarmacked the estate, prepared the whole hill as a competitive venue, and in August 1938 our first event was held here. For the relatively few people who may not have seen Prescott on the screen before, let me just describe the hill in a bit more detail. Let's start down on the start line. There we are, our faithful marshals who shepherd the cars to the start line and see them off, as it were. And you can see behind the tripod of the camera another line across the track. That's the pre-start line, and before that competitors can spin up their driven wheels to dry and heat their tyres, and then up to the start line. Unlike drag racing, although we've got a red and a green light, you don't have to go the instant that the green light comes on. You can sort of gather your thoughts and then go within reason when you want to. 64 feet from the start line we've got a speed trap, or a timing beam anyway, and you will know that the significance of that is from the start line to 64 feet in 2 seconds is exactly 1 G of acceleration, and the top hill climb cars get to the 64 feet in about 1.8 seconds, which is pretty fierce acceleration. Then you can see the famous bridge, which heralds the sweeping left-hand bend of Orchard Bend, which Sterling Moss said was one of his favourite bends in the whole world. And then up to the new loop, you can see the original course turned right at Orchard, where that little road off to the left on your screen. But in 1959, the course was extended up to the right-hand hairpin at Ettores, which you can just catch a glimpse of from the camera based at the left-hand hairpin up on the corner of your screen there. Here's Ettores, named, of course, after the great Ettore Bugatti, who founded the Bugatti company. And it's really interesting. There's a technique at Ettores that avoids turning into the apex too soon. Some people think that the apex is what you can see, the sort of paving stones on the inside there, but actually the apex is 2/3 of the way around the corner, so that you're lined up nicely for the little downhill blast, up, down, and then up to the next hairpin left, which is called Pardon, famous Pardon hairpin. And you can see now where the short course comes in and up to Pardon. And that course is still used by the Vintage Sports Car Club when they come here in the summer for their great vintage weekend. Now we've got a number of cars coming up the hill, and I'm not sure that I understand what's happening, but this I think is Matt Clark, who's leading the championship, the saloon car version of the championship. I didn't see Matt stop at the Clark, but maybe it's because I was concentrating on something else. This is an incredibly fast Mini. It's a very early Mini from 1960, but it's got a 1460cc engine, which means it's not only bored but it's stroked as well, and it's very, very quick. And Matt was putting up some really good times yesterday. He's now into and through the S's. The final corner out of the S's is called Rolt Corner, celebrating famous author and engineer Tom Rolt. And we'll pick up Matt Clark's time now. It's 54.89. Good time under the circumstances. He's followed by Martin Saunders in this 2-litre Ford Escort Mark I, the famous Escort rally car, made famous by people like Roger Clark. Great success, won the London to Mexico rally, hence a version of the Escort was called the Escort Mexico. And Martin Saunders safely into S's. You can imagine that the track is pretty slippery, although interestingly, because it's rained pretty much non-stop since yesterday afternoon, it's nice and clean, and at least it's consistently wet, so we're not agonizing over whether to put wet or dry tires on. Time for Martin Saunders, 62.23. Here's Andrew Keaney in this lovely little imp, the famous Hillman imp that sadly was not a success in the market, but technically very interesting with its little aluminium Coventry Climax based engine in the boot, as it were. Swing axle front suspension to make sure that it understeered rather than oversteered, and the trick with a standard imp to make it to handle properly is to put a bag of cement in the boot at the front. So Andrew Keaney into the S's. Andy Clark takes off from the start line. We'll see him in a second in another 1430cc Mini in the famous Cooper Works colours, when the Cooper cars, the Works cars, were racing in the British Saloon Car Championship. They always had this British Racing green colour and the 2 stripes on the bonnet. Heavy braking, and Andy is safely round Pardon hairpin. Lots of debate over the best route round Pardon. Some people go wide around the outside of it. Famous champion Roy Lane always used to say the best route round Pardon is about 1 metre in from the inside edge. Andy sweeps out through Rolt Corner, and he's followed up the hill by Stephen Akers in another Mini Cooper. Not quite as heavily modified as Matt Clark's, but still it's 1293 with the Cooper S as standard. The biggest engine as standard in the Cooper S was a 1275. We've got a time for Andy Clark of 61.75, for Andrew Keaney in the 60.81. Here's Stephen Akers in the Mini Cooper. We're waiting for him. Here he is at wrote corner. He didn't actually stop. I think that was an anomaly of the camera. And he disappears around the right-hand 180-degree semicircle and 100-yard sprint to the finish. Unusual car, the Reliant Scimitar Coupe, with its elegant fiberglass body, developed for the Ogle Daimler, which was a one-off designed by David Ogle for the Daimler company, and Reliant saw the body and said, hey, that would be really nice to make a coupe out of, and they did. And of course the coupe was followed by the famous Reliant Scimitar GTE with the hatchback in the back, which sold in big numbers. Here's an unusual car to be competing. It's the Triumph Stag, the well-known 3-litre V8 powered Triumph, based on the Triumph 2000 saloon chassis, but bodied by Michelotti. And the prototype so inspired Harry Webster of the Triumph company that he said, we've got to put this in production, which they did. And unfortunately they launched it before they'd really done comprehensive testing, and sadly the Stag was prone to overheating and gasket failure and cylinder head damage, and got a terrible reputation for unreliability, which effectively, well, almost killed it in the market. Time for Gary Cox in the Reliant, 57.49. Richard Jones in this quite early but nice Porsche 911, rather like the 2.7 Carrera, the famous Carrera, with its little ducktail at the back. The Stag went up in 75.63. And the Porsche, as the Porsche disappears around semicircle, will pick up Keith Wilson in a Mark I MG Midget. Here he is. The MG Midget was the slightly posher version of the Mark II Sprite, not the Frog Eye Sprite. The Frog Eye got killed off after 3 or 4 years, and the next Sprite, the Mark II, had a much more conventional body, and then they made a slightly smarter, more expensive version and called it the MG Midget. Porsche, Richard Jones, 56.89. So Keith Wilson safely through the S's, and we turn our focus to this really lovely little original Mallock U2. Arthur Mallock started producing Clubman's racing cars, sports cars. Originally called them U2s, and then but pretty soon they were called Mallocks, and they went on to producing Clubman's cars, which were hugely popular both on the hills and on the circuits for a long, long time. There was even a U2, a works one, that raced in Formula 3 just by taking the wings and lights off it. And all the pros in their rear-engine Lotuses and sophisticated Formula 3 cars rather sneered at this dumpy little front-engine car until it beat them. It was really quick. Here's a Mark 11 Mallock, classic Clubman's shape, and powered as the Clubman's class always was by the Ford Pushrod 1700cc engine. So we've had the saloon class and the sports class of the Hennies Championship. We're now into the racing car class, and there's a really interesting car just leaving the start line. We'll just see the Mallock disappearing, but here's Andy Tippett in this fabulous Brabham BT30X with an interesting history. It started life as a Brabham prototype that was really never used very much, and had a Coventry Climax 2.5 litre engine, and then they took the engine out, chucked the chassis into the corner, and Mike McDougall, who wanted to go hill climbing in a Brabham, turned up at the factory and said, have you got anything I can use? And they said, yeah, we've got that old chassis in the corner, you can have that if you want. So he did, and he put this 3.5 litre V8 engine Oldsmobile that led to the 3.5 litre Rover and it made a very successful hill climb car. I'll tell you a bit more about it when we next see it, but in the meantime, Jeremy Rivers Fletcher, in the Triumph Special that he constructed donkeys years ago, I think it's a TR3 chassis, TR4 chassis with a TR5 2.5 litre engine. I think I'm right, but Jeremy has campaigned this car for a long, long time. Looks a bit like a 1950s Formula 2 car. Andy Tippett in the Brabham 55.7. Carol Nichols takes off in the Nike Mark IV, built by her dad down in the West Country, down in Devon. And she's had this car for 3 or 4 years. She was looking for a long time for one of her dad's cars that she could buy, and now, very enthusiastic hill climber, takes this car all over the country to compete. Jeremy in the Triumph Special went up the hill in 59.64. Carol wisely taking it fairly easily on this horrible wet track. Doesn't stop Prescott being as lovely and beautiful as ever, nestling in the Cotswold Hills in the sort of mid-West Midlands of the UK. On the screen, Mike Bainbridge in the Ensign, 43 Ensign, made in the Birmingham area by Mo Nunn. And if you're watching this from the States, you'll probably be keen on Indy cars. You're probably aware that Mo Nunn, after leaving Britain, leaving Ensign, got very involved in the preparation and development of Indianapolis cars. He was a great success over there. Time for Carol Nichols in the Nike 66.24 and Mike Bainbridge in the Ensign 57.01. Here's Les Buck in the Pringett Mistral that he has campaigned for a long, long time. A rare Formula Ford car made by Mr. Corbett and Mr. Pringle. Hence Pringett made 7 of these. And I think Les is the only one on the mainland of the UK. I believe there's one in the Channel Islands and one in Germany, but a number of them have disappeared. Les heads for the finish. And Sam Wilimowski starts our runs in the New Barn Interclub License Speed Championship in his BMW E30 with the 1.8 engine. His brother is also competing. New Barn is a local fettler and seller of Land Rovers particularly, and they do a great job sponsoring the championship, their championship here. And again, it's in 3 classes for saloon sports cars and saloons and sports cars. So it doesn't have a racing car section. Sam well on his way in the BMW. James Dockery takes off from the start line. 2.75 for 64 feet shows the advantage of 4-wheel drive in the Impreza. Flat 4 turbocharged engine, of course, and capable of being tuned to develop huge amounts of power, 600 or 700 horsepower. I don't think James is producing that sort of power, but it's a nice quick car anyway. Sam in the BMW, 62.09. James heads towards the finish, and on the line is Ben Wilimowski in the sister car. This is another BMW E30. And so presumably it's a needle battle between the brothers. I think at the moment Sam is leading the way. They were nice cars and huge sales success for BMW. 1.6, 1.8, 2 litre, and then of course the M3, the original M3, which only was sold in left-hand drive, never came to this country officially, but is now hugely valued. Ben out of Rolt Corner makes way for Alex Risk in this lovely little Alfa Romeo GT Junior 1600cc engine. Such a pretty car and such a success both in the market and also in European touring car racing. Particularly the GTA version of this body shape was a huge success. So Alex again taking it fairly sensibly around the S's. In the meantime, we've got, I think, our only Lotus Elan today, that of David Rose, car from 1963. Such an innovative car, the Elan, and sold in huge numbers, lasted a long time. It was light, it was nimble, and it was fun. And a lot of people, as you can see David's done, have fixed the pop-up headlights in the popped-up position, although actually converted to fixed headlights, because the originals, I think they used vacuum power to pop them up and down, and they often failed, so they were winking at you rather than behaving themselves. We've got a time for Alex Risk, 67.05. Alex, of course, in the GT Junior Alpha. Here's Paul Renison, who is leading the championship at the moment in his lovely Porsche 944. The Interclub license, well, we used to have A licenses and B license in speed events, either, in other words, hill climbs and sprints in this country. You started your career with a B license and now an Interclub license, which effectively identified you as a relative newcomer. But if you wanted your A license or your national license, you had to get 6 signatures from the clerk of the course confirming that you had competed and behaved yourself, and that enabled you, if you wanted to upgrade to a national license. But lots of people don't want to. They're quite happy to enjoy the Interclub Championships. It only means that they can't enter a full British Hill Climb Championship meeting. Martin Curtis, hello Prescott, soggy end of the season, still weird to see it spectatorless. Well done indeed to the organising team. We will have a great afternoon, thanks. Paul on his way in the famous front-engined Porsche 944, successor of course to the 924, which was a bit sneered at because it had an engine out on Audi van, but nevertheless handled beautifully, transaxle at the rear, and sold in good numbers, enabling Porsche to develop it with their own engine, and that became the 944, which first appeared in 2.5 litre form and then in full 3 litre form. Sweet handling and a nice smooth engine because it had a balancing shaft to even out the vibrations of the big 4-cylinder engine. David Rose in the Elan 59.19. Paul Renison heads for the finish. Can he get under the 60s? Not quite. Time clicking up now. 65.02, and it brings us to our first MX-5. We've got a number of MX-5s, as you would expect today, and this is John Wadsworth in his version. I think that's a sort of Mark II version of the MX-5. We keep talking about the MX-5 as the best-selling sports car ever, and it deserves to be because it's a fun car, beautifully built, nice and reliable, inspired, we always say, and I think we're right, by the Lotus Elan. So not sold in huge numbers, but very successful for a long time was the Ginetta G20. Here's one in the hands of John Brunner. Originated in the days when the Ginetta company was owned and run by the Walklent brothers over in Essex, but now of course Ginetta has got much bigger. It has produced replicas of the G20, but also sponsors and runs very successful race series and even up to LMP cars for Le Mans. time for John Wadsworth in the red MX-5, 62.34. John Brunner heads for the finish, and Rob Gutteridge on the hill in another MX-5. John Brunner, 61.5. Glad to say that the latest version of the MX-5 that appeared a couple of years ago was justifiably very much praised by all the road testers, who said although it's brought up to date, it's still very much in the MX-5 mode of lightweight, nice handling and fun. So Rob Gutteridge nearly finished. Well, he has finished with exactly 65 seconds. Steve Perry navigates his way round Ed Torres, and you can see the consequence of turning into an early apex at Ed Torres. It means that you're not lined up ideally for the run down and then up again to Pardon. We do have a driver's school at Prescott every year, 4 or 5 times a year. If you want to take up hill climbing or improve your techniques, it's a brilliant way of doing so. Highly experienced tutors, they make it fun as well as informative. All your runs, of course, are videoed, and I do recommend anybody who is thinking of taking up hill climbing to have a go at the driver's school here at Prescott. Toyota MR2, the third version of the MR2, in the hands of Martin Rawson. Steve Perry in the silver MX-5, 64.66. Here's Martin Rawson in the MR2, and Andrew Wilcox off the line in the Caterham Super 7. What a revolution, in a way. Well, I suppose revolution's not the right word, but Colin Chapman produced the Lotus 7 in, crikey, the late 50s, I think, then decided to stop production and handed production over to Caterham, who've made a huge success, and these cars are still being built by Caterham. They moved from Caterham itself to, I think, Dartford in Kent, but they have developed the car, although it's still very much the traditional Caterham 7. Here's Thomas Twemlow in the Subaru Impreza. Twemlow family, great hill climbers. This one, I think, more developed than the Impreza, the black one that we saw earlier. Bit more power. Let's see how the time compares. We've got a time for Andrew Wilcox in the Caterham 7, 60.13. Wouldn't he have loved to go up 13 tenths quicker and get into the 50s, but he's got a second run this afternoon. Thomas Twemlow again heads for the finish, and his place, bottom of the hill, taken by Craig Mycock in the apparently pretty standard Peugeot 206 GT. Good opportunity to bring out the shopping car and have a bit of fun on the hill. But he's followed by Dave Nixon in an even wilder Subaru Impreza in the classic blue and gold of the ProDrive team, reminding us of the great Colin McRae. Looks to me as if the car, this is an ex-rally car. It's certainly quick, powerful. Craig Mycock in the Peugeot, 61.71. So Dave Nixon heads into the S's. If it's an ex-works ProDrive rally car, of course it's hugely valuable, and so Dave isn't going to risk bending it today. Can he get it under the 60-second mark? I think he probably can. Yeah, 57.81 for Dave Nixon. On the hill is a Ford Fiesta, the ST. Well, actually, it's not a full-blown ST, it's the ST line. So rather than the full 1500cc that the ST has, this has got the famous Ford 3-cylinder engine, little 1-litre 3-cylinder engine, but Andrew Till pedals it very effectively. We've got another imp on the hill, 1-litre imp, and it's a very, very quick one in the hands of Mark Maynard. I must mention the speed trap at the bridge, which I haven't done up to now, but you can see that Mark went through the speed trap into Orchard Corner at 57. Almost understeered into the kitty litter, but gathered it all together. Time for Andrew Till in the Impreza 60.33, no, beg your pardon. Andrew Till was in the Ford Fiesta 60.33, good time for the Fiesta, but Dave Nixon in the Impreza 57.81. Mark Maynard well on his way, and away from the line, Kevin Knight. In another well-known and very successful rally car in its era, the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus, which was an amalgam of Lotus twin cam in the little Roots Talbot chassis and body. And lots of them were made, not many of them still exist, but they are a great car to go classic rallying in. Andrew Till's time, 60.33. Mark Maynard has finished with a 57.87. That's a good time. And here comes David West in the little Peugeot 106 GTI, but much modified and very quick. Kevin Knight has finished. Kevin in the Sunbeam Talbot Lotus, and his time 74.47. I don't think Kevin has competed here at Prescott before, so understandably still learning the track. Another Peugeot 106. Quick one, but not, I don't think it's as extreme as the black one that we saw a few minutes ago. It's called a Quicksilver, but whether that was a marketing name for one type of Peugeot 106, I'm not sure. But lots of people start hill climbing in a little saloon or in a Caterham 7 or a Westfield, and then gradually make their way up. Most of our hill climb champions have started this way. The exception, although he's not champion yet, Sean Gould, who's got the record here. When he was 20, he jumped straight into the Gould 841, with which Chris Kramer won the Hill Climb Championship. Johnny Toon in the 106 Peugeot, 58.48. That's a good time, under 60 seconds for that Peugeot. Bax 157. These streams have been a godsend. Yeah, they have these last few months. Thanks for all your work. Well, thanks, Bax. That's nice of you to say so, but it has been hard work. And Rich Danby, who sets up the live stream, has done a fantastic job. It's pretty complex, as you can imagine, getting cameras all the way up the hill. Gus in Adelaide. Good evening, Gus. I don't know what time it is, but probably you ought to be in bed now. But thanks very much for commenting. We have a bit of a pause. Could we have a big shout out to Johnny Toon from Austria? Well, Johnny has just been up the hill, and he's been up the hill in under 60 seconds, 58.48. He was in the Quicksilver Peugeot. Johnny, well done. We didn't know that you were from Austria. And there's another person of the same name who's in the Morgan Plus 8. Roger Smith, big up to all those that have enabled the hill climbing to happen this year. Hoping we can be back in 2021 to smell the... it's gone. I don't read fast enough. Sorry about that, but thanks for your message. smell that two-stroke. Well, what two-stroke? Thanks as ever to the marshalling team. Roger, you'll have to explain what you mean by the two-stroke. While we have a bit of a pause, let me tell you a nice story about a very well-known manufacturer of racing cars called Tico Martini. Tico is an Italian living on Jersey in the Channel Islands, and he wanted to compete. Well, he did compete in a Coupe 500, and then he started looking at hill climbing and saw these, at the time, this was in the early 60s, saw these big brutal cars with big American V8s, and thought, well, hang on a second, I think we can do this differently. And he produced a little tiny, almost like a go-kart, the Tico Martini Special, but it wasn't a go-kart because it had full suspension front and back, it had Lambretta scooter front brakes, and immediately, and a Triumph twin motorbike engine, Norton transmission, and immediately he started winning. And the establishment, of course, were horrified at being beaten by this rinky-dink little thing and tried desperately to ban him. But it took a year or so before the powers that be applied a minimum wheelbase, and the Martini Special was no longer eligible for the championship. It's still in business and still owned. And of course, Tico Martini went on to great things, making Formula Junior, Formula 3, Formula 2, and even for a period Formula 1 cars. And the Martinis are famous in France and worldwide, and that was what Tico ended up doing. We're back in action with Nick West in the Peugeot 106. He's sharing this car. We've seen it before in the hands of David West. I'm not sure if they're brothers, but it's a family battle. So Nick in the Peugeot is in S's at the moment, but Joe McCrell has taken off in this racing version of the Austin Healey Sprite, the famous Mark I Frog Eye Sprite that is so endearing to look at and was such a fun car. The standard Sprite, gosh, you wouldn't believe how slow it was by today's standards, but my goodness, it was fun. When you were doing 65 miles an hour, it felt like 95. And luckily, lots of Sprites have survived the dreaded tin worm, and a lot of them are used for classic rallies and for hill climbing. Nick West finished in the Peugeot with a 60.65. Joe McCrell in the yellow Sprite heads for the finish. John Cavendish in this lovely MGB, reminiscent of the Works MGBs that raced at Sebring in America with the flared wheel arches and the headlights enclosed and much modified, but they were very successful, or relatively successful, in long distance racing in the States. And this is John Cavendish in his version. Another, whoops, oh wow, another Frog Eye. That's John Tewson. Got into a bit of a tank slapper, but luckily gathered it all together before he got to the bridge. Much modified Frog Eye Sprite with a hardtop that wasn't part of the original deal. You could never get your your Frog Eye Sprite straight out of the factory with a hardtop. You had to go to someone like Les Leston and buy one as an accessory. Nice to have so many Frog Eyes, because Claire Giles has taken off from the start line in her white one. John Tewson is very nearly at the top of the hill. Here's Claire. That's a clever arrangement of the windscreen, rather like the original Austin Healey 100, the four-cylinder one that had a folding or a semi-folding windscreen, and it looks as if Claire has done the same thing. We've got a time for John Tewson, 71.92, and for John Cavendish of 64.85. Now here's Rodney Isles in the lovely Alfa Romeo 4C that sadly is no longer produced, which had a carbon fibre centre tub and then aluminium extensions front and back, and the turbocharged 1.8 litre Alfa Romeo engine. Lovely car, slated by the road testers when it first came out for wayward handling, but it turned out to be a very simple modification of the front suspension that improved the handling 100%. And why Alfa didn't do that themselves, goodness knows. Anyway, Rodney's well on his way, and Chris Tabor takes off in this lovely little Riley Special, made out of an original Riley Imp, but lightened, special body built for it, and a 1500cc Riley engine. And Chris, this car was built about 10 years ago on Chris's farm, and I haven't seen it. It should have been here last weekend when we had the vintage meeting, but clearly Chris prefers the wet weather. Now here's Oliver Tomlin in the famous Chapman Mercury, built by his grandfather, with its 4.7 litre Mercury engine. And you may be aware of a challenge laid down to Max Verstappen, the F1 driver, to compete with a granny, because he was very rude about driving like a granny. And the granny who issued the challenge was Sandra, Oliver's mum. Sadly, I don't think anything's going to come of it, but it would be fun if the original idea was that Sandra and Max would compete at a hill climb in identical Aston Martins, but it hasn't happened yet. Let's hope it does. But here's Oliver Tomlin in this fearsome Chapman Mercury that he says you steer with the throttle much more than with the steering wheel. But and Oliver shares with Sandra a big 4-litre pill beam in the big racing car class at Championship Hill Climbs. He's finished with a 62.15, Chris Tabor in the Riley 66.72, and Rodney Isles in the Alfa 4C 53.98. Another nice 911 in Gulf, classic Gulf colours. It's an RS 3000. But here's David Franklin, well-known ex-hill climb champion, ex-circuit racer. Still, well, he's not an ex-circuit racer. He still races very frequently in historic racing in this lovely black MGB with its Rover V8 engine. Rover themselves never made a drop-head MGB with the Rover engine. They were always the fixed-head GT version. In fact, the first MGBs with the V8 engine were produced by a guy called Ken Costello, but I have a feeling this one, this conversion to the V8 was done by David himself, but it's a very lovely car. He's a brilliant driver. Glad to say we've got 3 Allards here today. Allard, the famous manufacturer in the south of London. Sidney Allard himself once won the Monte Carlo Rally, and these cars raced all over the world, particularly at Le Mans and places. They're hugely valued in the United States. This one's an original one that was first owned by a famous racing driver in the early 50s called Desmond Titterington, who was a works driver for Aston Martin, amongst others. And then this car went off to India, and it was discovered there and came back in a pile of boxes and has been beautifully rebuilt for Chris Pring. This one is a new one. This is a perfect replica of the Allard J2. This one's got the full house Cadillac engine, whereas Chris Pring's has got the Mercury V8, but with the Arden overhead valve conversion. We've got a time for David Franklin of 58.95, and Christopher Pring in the red Allard 70.68. Mark Butterworth well on his way. Here he is into and through the S's without drama. He's followed by George Proudfoot in a very early four-wheeled Morgan from 1937, I think. Yesterday I made the terrible mistake of crediting this car with a Coventry Climax engine. Actually, it hasn't. It's I'll come back to the Morgan, but in the meantime, here's Rupert Marks. Not often you see a full house Can-Am car on a wet, narrow hill like Prescott. This is Rupert Marks, who's had this car for a long time. This is the M12 McLaren. Shades of Bruce and Denny sweeping the field at the Can-Am Championship in the States with their orange McLarens, until Porsche came along with the turbocharged Porsche 917 and spoilt the party a bit. But in previous years, Rupert has driven this car from Essex around the M25 to compete here at Prescott, but wisely he's decided this weekend not to do so. He's brought it on a trailer. He's followed by John Harding in this elegant Series 1.5, I think, Jaguar E-Type, although it's a shame that American legislation meant that those faired-in headlights of the original E-Type Jaguar had to be opened up. As you can see, American safety regulations, thanks to Ralph Nader, had a negative effect on E-Types, and the final E-Types were effectively strangled, and they would struggle to do 120 miles an hour, whereas the original 3.8 Mark I E-Type, 150 or so. This is an interesting one. This is an early E-Type, but it's got a huge Lisholm supercharger nestling under the bonnet. It's got the engine enlarged to 4.7 litres. The supercharger makes an extraordinary noise, but does boost the power enormously. And you can see how the E-Type actually suits having wider tyres and wheels than standard. The standard E-Type, the wheels look a bit sort of buried under the wheel arches. John Harding in the red one, 62.04. Rupert Marks in the McLaren, 54.54, which I think is our quickest time so far today. The supercharged E-Type disappears. Its place is taken by Philip Lane in a Porsche 944, and here it is, a much modified 944, but nevertheless 42 miles an hour under the bridge. Lightweight Perspex windows, everything possible done to save weight. He disappears into and through the S's, and he's followed by a much wilder Porsche, Paul House's RSR with a 3.8 litre engine, 2.79 off the start, which is quick, and 66 through the speed trap at Bridge, which for today's conditions is extremely quick. Much modified, very fearsome Porsche. I don't think it's road registered. These cars are competing in the Bugatti Owners Club. Oops, we've got a car stopped on the hill. Paul Howes, I don't know if he's failed or if he's been red flagged. We've got a time for the preceding car, Philip Lane's car, of 68.25. So he's finished successfully, but for some reason Paul in the Porsche RSR has stopped on the hill. So the red flags are out. And Austin Weltman's Lotus Elise has been held on the start line, and Oliver Chilton's Mazda MX-5 has been red flagged. So there he is. He'll make his way probably back to the start. He'll go round at Torres, and then he'll be directed by the marshals at Orchard to go straight back to the paddock. We've got a side entrance into the paddock, which our brave marshal, when he's pulled his trousers up, is going to open the gate to. Now, are we going to have to rescue the Porsche? Susie, hello from Worcester, just down the road. Sunday, no, don't tell us. Now, Sunday roast on a tray in front of the telly doesn't get much better. Well, would you like to bring some here, Susie? There we go. Oliver. Mike from down in deepest Cornwall. Well done to everyone who's made livestream possible. Although we haven't been competing ourselves, we've been able to experience some hill climbing from home down here. Mike hill climbs in the big single-seater class. Brings it all the way up from deepest Cornwall. Looks as if Paul Howes has managed to get the Porsche to the top of the hill. We'll try and find out the reason for his stopping. In the meantime, here's Austin Weltman with a very early Mark I Lotus Elise. I'm sure you'll be bored of me endlessly saying that I much prefer the shape of the first Mark I Elise to the later one, although I understand that the later bodywork was both cheaper to make or less expensive to make and easier to fit. Lotus Elise, really the car that saved Lotus and has sold in big numbers since it was first introduced. Huge success. With the hood up, not easy to get into and even more difficult to get out of. It's like posting yourself through a letterbox. If Rich can focus on the Lotus on this, you'll see what we mean. Because you open the door, it's got high sills and it's a very narrow gap to thread yourself through. But of course there are times when it's important for weatherproofing and for aerodynamic reasons to drive with the hood up. So the course is clear. Austin starts the K-Series 1.8 litre Rover engine, mid-engine in the Elise, same engine as we found in the MGF and the MGTF, but this is a much modified K-Series producing, I don't know, probably more than 160 horsepower. Takes Austin under the bridge at 53 miles an hour. The Elise, of course, famous for lightweight and brilliant handling and road holding. They were such fun to drive. Well, they are such fun to drive. Wait till you see what we've got on the line. That's a 1935, the famous Morgan Super Sports with its V-twin Jap engine in the front, 3 wheels of course, the famous Morgan sliding pillar front suspension. The early versions of these, sort of 1929, had the accelerator handle on the steering column and only 2 gears, but David tells me this one has actually got 4 gears in the box. And it's amazing how nimble they are and how rapidly they can go around the corners. In vintage racing, there's some classic races between the Morgan three-wheelers and great big Bentleys sort of threatening to swallow them up, but they don't because the Morgans are so quick. Well, now Paul Howes is back on the start line, so we'll get an explanation of why he came to a halt, but clearly it wasn't a problem with the car, because the car is as quick as ever, which means quick, 64 under the bridge. David in the Morgan, 68.65. Austin Weltman in the Elise, 61.58. That's a good run in the Elise. Now, what can Paul do in this fearsome RSR 911? I wonder how much effect that big wing on the back has at the sort of speeds that you achieve at Prescott. But bombing down the Autobahn at 180, probably it does a good job in gluing you to the road. Another MX-5 in the hands of Oliver Chilton is on his way, 47 under the bridge. Here he is at Orchard. But Paul has done a 53.44, which I think is our fastest time so far. Oliver Chilton in the Mazda at Pardon. A nice Sunday country drive in the Cotswolds. Robin Johnson takes off in the Frog Eye Sprite that he's sharing. So we've seen this car before. He's sharing it, of course, with Joe Mackrell. No dramas so far into the S's. And his place is taken. Here he is into and through the S's. This is Robin Johnson in the Frog Eye. He's followed by David Slade sharing the Sebring MGB GT, which we saw earlier in the hands of John Cavendish. He was under the bridge at 47, Robin Johnson in the Sprite 49. And John Tewson on his way in the orange Sprite that had a bit of a tank slapper under the bridge when it was being driven by Pat Cooper. I have to give you some unfortunate news that because of the weather conditions, Alex Summers and Sean Gould have both gone home in their fearsomely fast top-class race cars. But we've got an interesting number of hill climb single-seaters, and leading the way is Lynne Gilbert in the 600cc OMS Hornet, OMS made by Steve Owen up in Yorkshire. John Tewson in the Sprite has nearly finished and does so with a 65.29. Here's Lynne Gilbert in the OMS. Little 600cc bike engine. There is still a class in hill climbing for cars up to 600, racing cars up to 600 cc's, but very few entries nowadays. So the few that remain are merged with the 1100cc class, which of course is a bit of a struggle for them. Lynn, a harmless little spin at Pardon, easily done if you get the power on a little bit too early, particularly on a wet track. So there'll be a red flag, and our next car up, which is the Allard of David Loveys, is held on the start line. Lynn, no harm whatsoever. But she'll be cursing in Anglo-Saxon under her helmet because she'll get another run later on, but she's really thrown away this run. Marshall's will. She's probably got a self-starter on board, so she should be able to restart the engine if it has stopped, but probably not a reverse gear. So she needs a bit of a pull backwards, and then she'll be back up to the top of the hill without any harm done. There are a number of, I suppose it's not too rude to call them cottage industries, making special hill climb cars. Steve Owen really started it all with the OMS nearly 30 years ago, and he's produced more than 100 of his little single-seaters. Well, when I say little, of course, Trevor Willis, in his OMS with the 3.2-litre PowerTech engine, has won the British Hill Climb Champion 3 times. So you can get your OMS in all sorts of sizes, and either with a space frame chassis or with a full carbon fibre tub and pre-preg carbon fibre bodywork. The same in this industry are other DJ and Force and Empire. I'll talk a bit more about them if we have another pause. But in the meantime, we've got this early Allard K1 Sport in the hands of David Lovis, for some reason in the racing car class of the Bugatti Owners Club Championship. But clearly it's a road car, probably ought to be in the sports car class. But nice to see an original early Allard with its flathead V8 engine. They were pretty successful from sort of 1946 or so into the mid-50s, but faded away under competition from the likes of the Austin Healey or Jaguar. But David Lovis threads the big car with its fairly soft suspension up Prescott, and we've got a treat on the start line, which we'll see very, very shortly. What about that? Ed Burgess in the fabulous twin cam Grand Prix Bugatti from 1930-31, the development of the Type 35 that raced so successfully from 1924 up to 1930. Straight 8 roller bearing engine, supercharged of course, and the story is that Ettore Bugatti saw the twin cam engine of the Miller, the American Grand Prix car, when they came over to compete in the French Grand Prix, and thought, hey, if I make a cylinder head like that on top of the Type 35 block, that'll be quite something. And it was. It gave him another 30 or so horsepower. Ed Burgess has competed in this car for a number of years. But here's Beau Williams struggling to get his Type 35 off the start line. Now the fact is, I hate to tell him that because his back wheels crossed the start line, that is a failed run. Maybe because it's a Bugatti, he'll be allowed to have another run. It would be a shame to deprive us of a chance of seeing this lovely Type 35 going up the hill. In the meantime, Ed Burgess has finished with a 61.09, which under the circumstances is a very good time. Now I wonder whether Beau was seen to be suffering a lot of wheel spin, but I don't think there's a mechanical problem. We'll see. He's, as you can see, parked it on the grass to the side of the start line, and if we're lucky, he'll get another run. In the meantime, Edward Tyack, who was competing here yesterday in the Mark 6 Nike, has brought his Formula Ford car to the line. Great to have 2 Nike cars. We remember we saw Carol Nichols in hers a few minutes ago. Here's Edward Tyack, great hill climbing family. Local family, and Edward and his dad have been here many, many times. Ken Nichols made the chassis of the Nike and often the suspension, but tended to borrow body parts from other makers. And this one's, I think the body is mostly Brabham. That's why it's so pretty. No problems at all for Edward. Round the semicircle and up to the finishing line. Will he be under 60 seconds? He is, 58.09. Good run. Pete Tatham in the OMS with the 1300 Suzuki engine. Or is it a Hayabusa? I'm not sure. But it's a bike engine and it's another OMS. OMS 25, which is the model that Steve Owen is currently making. Could be in line for fastest time of the day. It's in the mid 40s, late 40s. Pete Tatham into the 50s, 51.9. Murray Wakeham in another OMS. This is the one with the carbon. In fact, this was the first OMS to have a carbon fiber tub when Steve was really experimenting with carbon fiber. So if you have a close look at this tub, it's probably thicker than it needs to be, but in a consequence it's very stiff. And Murray Wakeham was under the bridge at 61, so he's going pretty rapidly. The good news is that Beau Williams has brought the Type 35 Bugatti back onto the start line. In the meantime, really interesting car. This is an Italian special made from the running gear of the fabulous Lancia Aurelia, the beautiful GT car made by Lancia with its V6 engine in the front and the transaxle at the back. And in the Aurelia had a big long drive shaft, of course, between engine and transmission. But the maker of this, well, chopped the drive shaft down to it's only about an inch long. Nevertheless, it's a long way from the front of the engine to the back of the transmission. So Dominic Hentel's special has a very long wheelbase. Now then, we'll focus. It isn't Beau, I'm sorry to say. It's Mike Marshall in his well-known and lovely Type 35B Bugatti, the classic 2.3 litre supercharged blown Bugatti with its disc wheels. Ettore was a great innovator, and these wheels contain the brake drum, so when you're racing in Grand Prix and you wanted quick access to the brake shoes, well, you just took the wheels off and there were the brake shoes ready to be adjusted. But isn't that a lovely car? The Type 35 in the hands of British driver Grover Williams won the first Monaco Grand Prix in 1929. Car was painted green, British racing green, in honour of Grover Williams, who went on to join the French resistance during the war and tragically got captured and killed. So Mike heading for the finish. Steve Thomas in this really interesting, very early TVR, the little 1760 Vixen, short wheelbase. There was a Griffith version of this TVR with a big 4.7 litre Ford engine, which was a lot of engine for a very short car. And the little Vixen had all sorts of engines. Not sure what this one's got. We saw Lynne Gilbert in the OMS Hornet. This is Chris Howard Harris sharing the same car. Steve Thomas in the Vixen, nearly there. This is the 600cc OMS Hornet. Listen to those revs. That's quick, 62 under the bridge for a 600cc OMS. Chris rapidly round Pardon, where partner Lynne had a little spin, but as you can see, the car completely unharmed. And on the line, Einon Price, who was our winner yesterday in the Force TA. He stalled it, but it doesn't matter because his rear wheels didn't cross the start line. Chris in the OMS Hornet, 52, that's a good time, 52.18, excellent. Einon yesterday was in the 44s, I think, to win the meeting yesterday. Had the honour of his Tour d'Honneur, his final run up the hill, with where the spectators are meant to cheer and applaud, and there weren't the spectators, which is sad, but nevertheless he really enjoyed that. And he's going quickly, touch of oversteer at Ettores, gathers it all together. This will be a quick run. Let's put our money on it. Mid-40s, it might be even beat yesterday's 44 seconds. Keep an eye on the clock. 41, 42, 43, 44.01. Brilliant. Well done, Einon. That I'm pretty sure will be, well, certainly fastest time so far, and probably will stay best time of day. Those are our first runs of the afternoon. We start the whole program over again with Matt Clark in this little Mini. Now, in his first run, Matt did a 55.39. This is a really rapid Mini and a rapid driver, very good driver, Matt, as well. So can he beat this morning's time? He might do, because it hasn't rained for a while. The track is still pretty wet, but maybe not as wet as it was at 12:30 this afternoon. I think Matt has got the saloon car section of the Hennies Cider Championship pretty much buttoned up. But I hope to hear later on this afternoon who has won each class and who's the overall winner of the Hennies Cider Championship. Is the prize a barrel of cider? I'm not sure, probably not. Matt has finished, and it's a 54.37. It's a good improvement on this morning's time. On the hill now, Martin Saunders. And Martin's time this morning was a 64.38. I think Martin can do considerably better than that. Goes a little bit wide, but harmless out of Rolt Corner. He's followed by Andrew Keaney in this rapid little imp. Andrew's time was a 62.7 this morning, early this afternoon. Martin has done a 61.46, so a good improvement on his first run. One of the advantages of the Imp was the opening rear window, so you could load some luggage through the rear window onto a shelf behind the passenger seats, although the main luggage boot was the front of the car. Andrew is there in 61.59. Here's Andy Clark in his large engined Mini 1430, means that not only has the bore been increased, but the stroke as well. The Imp, Andrew Kearney, 61.59. Andy Clark's nearing the top of the hill. Stephen Akers sets off in his slightly tamer Mini Cooper with a 1293cc engine. Andy Clark in the green Mini has finished with a 61.8. I guess those lines in the windscreen are for electrically demisting the windscreen. Doesn't work on the side screens, you can see. Side windows. This is Stephen Akers in his Mini Coupe, and on the line we've got the Scimitar Coupe of Gary Cox. The original coupes, when they were first introduced, had the straight 6 2.5 litre engine, which came from the Ford Zodiac, but pretty quickly they went on to the V6 Ford Essex engine of 3 litres. Stephen Akers heads for the finishing line in his Mini Cooper 65.09. Gary safely round Harden and into the S's. Away from the start goes Alistair Clark in the Stag. Nice to see, nice to hear, makes a nice noise from its 3 litre V8 Triumph engine. Number of them have been re-engined with the Rover 3.5 litre V8, which in a way is a shame, because actually nowadays modern technology has sorted out the overheating problems of the original 3 litre Triumph engine. And it's nice to keep these cars original. I think Stags, the value of Stags has really bottomed out, and they're much more appreciated, and therefore the price is appreciating as well. But a great, easy to run classic car. Time for Gary Cox in the Scimitar 56.92. 56.92. Matt Clark, I think, will stay quickest in the saloon car section with his 54.37, because we're now into the sports car section. Richard Jones is on the hill in the Porsche 911, 61.87, first time up. He would love to get down into the 50s. Alistair Clark, 75.71 in the Stag. So I'm afraid we've had a number of non-starters in the sports car section, because we're now going on to the racing car class. But the last of our sports cars is Keith Wilson in this Mark 1 MG Midget. The Porsche in the hands of Richard Jones, 56.58. 56.58 on the line. Peter Thurston, we'll see in a second, in the beautiful little Malak U2, rapid little car, 1700cc Ford pushrod engine, drives it round the bridge at 63. Peter's going really well, very low slung car. It's you wouldn't drive it on the road. It's a sports racing car and a quick one as well. So effectively, it's just like a Formula 3 car. When the U2 raced in Formula 3, it was very little different from how this one looks now. Keith Wilson in the MG Midget has finished good time, 63.08, which was a 3.5 second improvement on his first run. So maybe the hill is drying out a bit. Let's see how Phil Fisher gets on in his Mark 11 Malak. I haven't got the time for his first run on my screen. But it should be down in the 50s, we'll see. But here's the Brabham BT30X of Andy Tippett taking off the line. I told you about Mike McDougall getting this car, putting the V8 engine in the back. But if you weren't listening yesterday, I was describing the extraordinary Grand Prix of Spain at Montjuic in Barcelona, which was the first outing of Formula 1 cars with the very high aerodynamic wings front and back on great long sticks, which were very quickly banned because they kept breaking and causing awful accidents. But this Brabham has got the holes where the wishbones attached to the frame of the chassis, the holes in which the sticks went. So this was clearly a chassis destined to have high level wings front and back, but probably never had them. Andy Tippett, good time, 53.9. Here's Jeremy Rivers Fletcher in the Triumph Special. His father, Rivers Fletcher, was, when he was very young, he was a passenger on a racing Bentley at Brooklands, wrote a lot of books, was really the publicist for BRM for a long time, but also hill climbed a lot, particularly in an HWM ex-Formula 2 car with a Jaguar engine. Actually tipped it up here at Orchard Bend on one occasion, but I think no harm to himself. Andy Tippett in the Brabham, 53.9. I think we've seen that before. Jeremy Rivers Fletcher, 59.79. He'll be glad to be in the 50s. Here's Claire Nichols again in the Nike. Carol Nichols, she would love to get into the 60s. She did a 71.49. I think she's determined to go a bit quicker this time. Mike Bainbridge off the line in the Ensign. We'll see him in a second. Meanwhile, Carol heads for the semicircle. Here's Mike Bainbridge in this very pretty little Ensign with its side radiators. Mo Nunn did a great job. Ensign indeed produced a couple of Formula 1 cars. They were handicapped by running the Hart engine, as far as I remember, in the era of the turbocharged 1.5 litre F1 cars, but Mo Nunn pretty soon went off to the States and made a great success of his career there. Sam Wilimowski sets us off in the Bugatti Owners Club Championship. Again, their last run of competition for the championship this year in the BMW E30. In the meantime, Mike Bainbridge in the Ensign, 53.47. Carroll did get into the sixes, a low sixes, good run of 63.76. Here's Sam Wilimowski in the red BMW. His brother Ben will be following pretty soon. But on the line we've got James Dockery in this 2-litre Subaru Impreza. You can pick up Imprezas for not a great deal of money nowadays, and if they've been well looked after, they're a great car to have fun on the roads and on the circuits. James takes off. Let's see what his speed is under the bridge. It's a 59. That's okay. Lots of traction to drag him round Ettores and pull him down the slope towards Pardon. This is a car from 2002, 18 years old, but you wouldn't think so to look at it or to listen to it. It's still very effective. So James well on his way in the Subaru. Here's Ben Wilimowski, brother of Sam, in a similar car. They're nice, aren't they, the E30 Beamers? And James Dockery is finished with a 56.38. What did Sam do? He did a 62.71. Of course, these are all subject to handicap, and I don't have their handicaps in front of me, so I'm not able to do a quick calculation of who has beaten their handicap or got nearest to it. But I'm hoping that we'll get the results of these three championships before the end of the day. We've got a time for James Dockery in the Impreza of 56.38. Ben Wilimowski well on his way up the top of the hill in his BMW. On the line is the lovely Alfa Romeo GT Junior of Alex Risk. What more to say about these delicious little cars with the famous Alfa Romeo twin cam engine. 49 under the bridge, compared with Ben's 54 in the BMW. Alex's Alfa Romeo dates from 1977, but I think Alfa were doing a better job of rust prevention in those days, in the late 70s, so a lot of these GT Juniors have survived in nice condition. He'll disappear around semicircle, making way for David Rose in this hardtop Lotus Elise. The Elise's predecessor was the Lotus Elite, with its beautiful body designed by an accountant, Peter Kerwin Taylor, which Colin Chapman, it was revolutionary because it was a full fiberglass monocoque body chassis, which had lots of advantages in terms of stiffness and lightweight, certain disadvantages in terms of attaching the suspension to the fiberglass. The early cars they tended to pull apart, but also made the Elite quite a noisy car. The Elan was much more simple to make with its backbone frame. Alex Risk, his time 66.37. David Rose in the Elan 59.08. Here's our championship leader, Paul Renison, in the Porsche 944. I think Paul is taking it fairly easily today, 48 under bridge. There's no point in going crazy. First of all, he's got to drive the car home. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think he's got his class in the championship pretty much buttoned up. Sadly, again, a lot of his competitors who were entered for today's meeting have decided not to come. Here's John Wadsworth in a very pretty version of the Mazda MX-5 with its chrome surround to the windscreen, which is fairly uncommon, hardtop, flared wheel arches, making it a bit special, and it's quick as well. Paul Renison in the 944, 62.4. Here's John Wadsworth. Wiper going, but is it raining? Oh, I suppose those hills, those trees are dripping water, but I'm glad to say the rain isn't falling at the moment. On the line, John Brunner in the G20 Ginetta, having quite a conversation with the start line marshals. Not sure why. No dramas. Nicely off the line. Minimum of wheel spin. So 3.44 for the first 64 feet, which is pretty good under these conditions. John Wadsworth has finished, and his time 61.25 in the red MX-5 Mazda. Here's John in the little G20. Road registered. You could use this car on the road. It was perfectly tractable as a road car, and then the weekends go hill climbing, sprinting or racing. John sweeps through Rolt Bend, sweeps through semicircle. Yesterday, I'm sad to relate, Alex Summers in his first run went off the road at the semicircle and down the bank. Fortunately, no harm done either to him or the car, but I think wisely he decided there's no point in risking the car today. We do miss seeing that car, and also Sean Gould in the fabulous GR59 Gould, but quite understand their reasons for not wanting to risk the car here today. This is Rob Gutteridge in the Mazda MX-5. He's followed by Steve Perry in the silver one. But let's just watch Rob heading towards Semicircle. The drop off the road at Semicircle, when you're competing, it feels a bit daunting because you don't, it feels like the edge of a cliff, but actually if you do go off there, it's a fairly gentle slide down the grass. The difficulty, of course, is hoiking the car back onto the track up the slope. Time for Rob Gutteridge in the red MX-5, 63.04. For John Brunner in the Ginetta, 61.11. And for John Wadsworth in the other MX-5, the red one, a good run in 61.25. Here's Steve Perry, and I think, is it the last of our MX-5s, or have we got one more to come? I think we've got one more to come. Quite an early MX-5. They first came here in the British market, I think, in 1989. So MX-5s have been on the market for 31 years. No wonder they're the best-selling sports car ever. Steve disappears and he'll be in the low 60s with a 64.6. And here's Martin Rawson in this nice little Toyota MR2. They couldn't call it an MR2 in France, and if you speak French you'll understand why. But mid-engined, a bit like the Elise and the MGF. Only handicap with the third version of the MR2, which this is virtually no luggage space at all. So if you wanted to go away for the weekend, it was a toothbrush and not much else. Also available with automatic gears, and quite an efficient little automatic box. My son had a Mark I MR2, the rather square-shaped one, which was a lovely little car to drive. Really cute. Cute also is the Caterham Super 7. Now I suppose cute actually isn't the best adjective for it, but what a history. The Lotus 7 right through from, I think, 1959, the first Lotus 7 was produced by Lotus, Colin Chapman, and they're still going strong. They're still providing huge fun. We've got a time for Martin Rawson of 63.25. Andrew Wilcox, illustrating the advantage of four-wheel drive and flat four engine giving it a very low centre of gravity. Do keep the messages coming if you'd like to. Always fun to read and see where people are watching from. Thomas chucks the Impreza around Pardon. He went under the bridge at 54. This should be in the low to mid 50s, I think. We shall see. His first run was a 59. This time, slightly quicker, 59.12. Craig Mycock sharing the, not sharing, in the 206 GT Peugeot. Not quite as popular as the famous 205. Got his hazard flashes. Did have his hazard flashes. He's turned them off. Clearly there's no drama. And he's followed by Dave Nixon in this full house Pro Drive Rally Spec Subaru Impreza. Terrific rally car. I don't think Dave has, I'm not sure if Dave's been to Prescott before. His first run was a 58.85. I suspect this one will be considerably quicker, but we'll see. Craig Mycock has finished with a 62.16. Michelle, well done, Dad. Dave Nixon, here he is. He's on the hill at the first time up Prescott today in his Impreza. I thought so. Thanks for the great coverage. Well, it's good to see him, and I think this run is going to be a lot quicker than before. 56.63, 2 seconds and a bit quicker than his first run. Well done. Here's Andrew Till in a very standard Ford Fiesta, and not the full house ST with its 4-cylinder 1500cc engine, but with the rinky-dink little 1-litre 3-cylinder Ford engine, which won Engine of the Year in the European judging 3 years running. Tiny little engine, you can cover it with a sheet of A4, but hugely efficient. And as you can see, it little Ford Fiesta with that little engine trots along nicely. Andrew Till's first run was a 61.97, only 3 seconds or so behind the fearsome Subaru Impreza. Equally fearsome is this 1-litre Imp in the hands of Mark Maynard. It's astonishingly quick for a Hillman Imp. Nice car to go classic rallying. Time for Andrew Till was a 59.44. Time in the Fiesta. Whee! Slightly wide. Out of the S's goes Mark Maynard, taking up all the track and some of the Dragon's Teeth on the outside, but no harm done. Here's Kevin Knight, who I think is having his first meeting here at Prescott in the Sunbeam Talbot Lotus, which had a great, this car had this make of car, this type of car, had a very distinguished rallying history. Little Sunbeam, little Talbot, but with the Lotus twin cam engine. I think he was feeling his way a bit first time up to record an 84.81, so I reckon he can take 10 seconds off that time, second run. Quick though is David West in the Peugeot 106. Yeah, 73.7 for Kevin, good improvement on his first run. David sharing this with Nick West, so that it's a family battle, and of the two, David is slightly the quicker. I think he even lifted a rear wheel out through Rote Bend in this 106 with its 1.8-litre engine, and his time is a 58.35. That's a huge improvement. Here's Johnny Toon. Did we get a message saying Johnny was from Austria? If he is, here he is. Neatly under the bridge. Time for David West, 58.35. Yeah, that was a good improvement. waiting for more cars to appear on the start line. Meanwhile, we're watching Johnny Toon. And Johnny's first run, if I can find it, was a 15. It was good, 59.8. His first run this afternoon. Bit of an improvement, 58.55 second run. Empty hill, empty start line. Of course, so many of those cars have two drivers, so they come down to the paddock and one driver has to hop out, the next one has to hop in, so there's inevitably a bit of a pause. Oh, Rich, let's have that again, because I missed that nice message from Sweden. Watching from Stockholm, as my dear friend George Proudfoot is competing in the Morgan. Yes, nice car, isn't it? With a standard engine. That's right, I was struggling to remember the engine. Thanks for the message. George actually said the engine is, well, he used an Anglo-Saxon word to describe it, not very complimentary. John Hewitt, super coverage, really brightening up a rainy Sunday. John from Glenavy, Northern Ireland. Thanks, John. David Lloyd Thomas, thank you for the hill climbing community and motorsport in general for continuing to put on these events and not giving up. Indeed, never give up, never give in. It's sad not to have spectators. Prescott's such a lovely place to come to. It's beautiful countryside. There's a steam railway passing close by. So in the summer, a weekend at Prescott is a real treat. And particularly, we have a number of special events. In May, we have La Vie en Bleu, La Vita Rossa, which celebrates French and Italian cars. And it started as a real French weekend with Prescott pretty much turned into Paris, and lots of can-can girls and French motor clubs displaying their cars in the Orchard car park. But last year we doubled it up with Italian cars, and along came lots of Maseratis, Ferraris, and so on. So that's La Vie en Bleu. Then every year at the end of the season, normally we have our Autumn Classic, which celebrates Americana and American cars. We have a wall of death, we have burger bars, the whole place turns into the United States, and it's such fun. Got some wonderful American cars competing. So the second drivers of these cars in this class bring their cars to the line. This is Nick West sharing with David. Again, it's a family battle. David got down into the 58s, didn't he? Second run. So can Nick win family honours back? We shall see. He was fairly quick under bridge, 54, and quite a good start, 3.39, not bad for the first 64 feet. So he's got to beat the Davids at 58.35 to win the family battle. He might just do it too. He's going around semicircle at 51.52. Not quite 58.56, but a close run thing. Robin Johnson in the yellow Sprite that he shares with Joe McCrell. It is Joe McCrell sharing with Robin Johnson. And Joe crosses the line, early 60s perhaps, 64.4. John Cavendish in the Sebring MGB. Looks good, doesn't it, with those flared wheel arches, reminding us of the Sebring 9 hours and Sebring 3 hour races. Works sprites. Austin Healey entered, I think 3 years running, the Austin Healey Sebring sprites for the 3 hour race, and included Sterling Moss in the driving team, Pat Cooper in the bright orange sprite, slightly hesitant off the line, cost him half a second or so. Here he is around Orchard, and a nice late entry into Torres, so doesn't get it quite up to the apex, 2/3 of the way round. Time for John Cavendish in the MGB, 63.29. 63.29. Pat Cooper in the S's. Claire Giles has taken off in the white sprite. Delicate start, no wheel spin, 3.64. A good start. Get too many revs, you sit there with the wheel spinning and going nowhere. Yes, I commented last time on this cut down windscreen. It really does work nicely, doesn't it? So where's Claire? She is in the S's. There she is. She's not sharing the car. Here's Rodney Isles in the 4C Alpha, turbocharged 1.8. He's a highly experienced racer. Sprint champion, 3 years, 3 times in big single-seaters, but really enjoying this lovely 4C Alpha. Really interesting yesterday, he had a big head-to-head battle with the little Austin Alfa Romeo 1600 GT Junior, and their times were very similar, but I think today Rodney will be considerably quicker. And he's followed by Chris Tabor in this lovely little Riley Special. We had Vintage Weekend here last weekend, and there were lots and lots of special Rileys, particularly the 1100cc Brooklands Riley, which had a very similar body to this. Rodney Isles has finished. Good time, 51.55. Excellent. Chris was determined to have the radiator grille enclosed in that rather elegant nose cone. But now Oliver Tomlin in this fearsome Chapman Mercury, particularly on a wet track. Oliver has great fun in this car, competes in it all over the place. It's very, very hairy, but as long as you're delicate with the throttle, it's okay. 4 carburetor intakes, 8 carburetor intakes sticking out of the top of the bonnet to power the side valve flathead V8 engine. So watch Oliver steering the Chapman Mercury with the throttle around the S's, and off from the start has come Chris Stone in this fearsome Golf Porsche 911 RS. But he's taking it pretty easily. It's a lovely car. And I don't think Chris has got a lot of experience here at Prescott. So teaching the Porsche the way up the hill. His first run was a 64.74, which is pretty good. Now David Franklin, hugely experienced, brilliant driver, hill climb champion once, and great circuit racer. Drives very often at Goodwood in the Goodwood Revival in very valuable Ferraris, because David is not only quick, but he brings the car back in good order. He's a highly experienced. Often a debate among circuit racers whether starting in hill climbs give you some advantages, and you do see some advantages, particularly off the start, because one of the techniques of saving time on the hills is getting the start right, whereas circuit racers, some of them anyway, don't concentrate so much on how to get the car off the line very quickly, but David does. Time for Chris Stone, 62.48 in the Porsche. Time for David Franklin will be coming up in just a second or so. Now Chris Pring in this lovely J2, very original J2 Allard, with its first owner being Desmond Titterington, I think was based in Northern Ireland. Then it went off to India and raced in India and came back in a pile of boxes, but it's been beautifully rebuilt. This is the classic J2 Allard. Lots of them went to the States and had successful racing history in the States. I don't know if you ever watched a program called Chasing Classic Cars on Sky Turbo, but there was one program a year or two ago that really focused on the J2 Allard. Chris Pring disappears Mark Butterworth in his toolroom replica of the Allard J2. This one with the 5.4 litre Cadillac engine, which was, I think, the most expensive engine you could get in an Allard. Sidney Allard also. Did Sidney Allard win the Hill Climb Championship? He competed just after the Second World War in the Steyr Allard. It was his own chassis, but with a Steyr air-cooled V8 engine out of the German equivalent of a Brenngан carrier. Now, we had a message about George Proudfoot, and here he is in the Morgan, and thank you for reminding me that the engine isn't a commentary climax, it's a standard engine. And George reminded me that Standard provided engines for the very early Jaguars, at a time when they were called SS, Bill Lyons building them in Coventry. And the early SS cars were actually Standard chassis as well as the Standard engine on the exotic body developed by Jaguar. George waves to his mates, to the marshals anyway, on the outside of the hill, and clearly enjoying this car. A similar Morgan to this actually raced at Le Mans in about 1935. I think it won its class. Rupert Marx in the fearsome Can-Am McLaren. Rupert has also got a Grand Prix Bugatti Type 59, with which, of course, he competes here at Prescott. But as you can see from the number plate, this McLaren is road registered, and although he often does drive this car on the road, he's not going to today. He's going to shove it on a trailer to take it home. Time for George Proudfoot in the Morgan, 68.55. Pretty good time in a 1937 Morgan. See how much power that McLaren has got. You've got to be very careful pressing the accelerator pedal out of the corner. Rupert Marx, it'll be in the early 50s. Meanwhile, John Harding in this lovely, elegant E-Type leaves the line. There's a screaming noise on the start line, which will be explained in a second. But Rupert in the McLaren 53.63, brave run. This E-Type has clearly come back, probably from California, left-hand drive. I hope it hasn't got the American spec engine. I think they had Stromberg carburetors that strangled them because of the very fearsome regulations, particularly in California. Here's the explanation for the screaming noise. It's this extraordinary E-Type 4.7 litre engine and a Swedish Lysholm supercharger buried in the nose of the car. It weighs quite a lot. It weighs apparently about 40 kilos. And so George is hoping to find a carbon fibre bonnet that will reduce the weight at the front of the car. He's driven this car to Italy, does a lot of touring in it, but it's very, very powerful, very quick. And he says the screaming noise is almost intolerable inside the car. John Harding in the maroon E-Type 60.08. Just outside the 50s. George screams his way round semicircle on the line. The modified Porsche 944 of Philip Lane. It's quoted as having a 2-litre engine. I thought the 944 either came with 2.5 or 3, but I stand to be corrected. We've got a time for George Harding in the screaming E-Type of 55.83. Philip has got the suspension of this 944 tied right down. Probably not very comfortable on the road, but improves the handling on the circuits and on the hills. On the line we've got Paul Howes in this fearsome Porsche RSR 3.8 flat 6 engine, big whale tail sticking out the back. The red 944 round semicircle heads for the finishing line. Meanwhile, Paul 64 miles an hour under the bridge. That's good under today's conditions. The hill is drying out slightly, but not enough. You'll still see the spray off the tyres of the Porsche. It's good camera position, that, isn't it? Low down on the way into the S's. Lovely to see the cars heading straight for the camera. Philip Lane, previous runner, 66.33. Paul Howes, good time, 53.12. Now Oliver Chilton on his way in, I think, the last of our MX-5s today. Elegant black one. Detachable, is it I think it's a detachable hardtop. Lift it off and leave it in the garage. The new one, of course, has a version with a folding hardtop, which adds a bit of weight to the car but makes it much easier when there's a sudden rain shower. Austin Weltman, you'll see in a second, leaving the line in the early Lotus Elise. While the black Mazda is nearly at the finish. Austin round Orchard at 50 miles an hour. I think this one has got a huge mileage on the... Austin's had it for a long time, done, I think it's heading for 200,000 miles, something like that. But of course, high mileages tend to be good for a car rather than bad for a car, as long as it's well maintained, which this one clearly is. Austin's still climbing, heading round semicircle. I think it'll be in the mid-50s. Meanwhile, the lovely roar of the twin-cylinder Jap engine, and quite a struggle to control the Morgan. David Roberts, of course, only one wheel at the back and lots of wheel spin. Now he's got it going nicely. Beautiful handling, it's really surprising. I mean, if you overdo it in a three-wheeler Morgan, it does tend to lift one of the front wheels, and we see some dramatic pictures of Morgans threatening to turn over, but they hardly ever do. Understeers like crazy to begin with into Pardon, but David gathers it all together. The engine in this one actually is a post-war Jap engine, but of course in design terms very little change from the original Jap engine of the 30s. Here's Robin Johnson sharing, of course, with Joe Mackrell in the Sprite. And David Roberts in the Morgan three-wheeler 6907. Back on the line is the Sebring MGB, which we'll see very shortly. Yeah, here comes the Sebring MGB. We're waiting for time for Robin. He's nearing the top of the hill. David Slade in the MGB, 50 miles an hour round Orchard. 63.91 for Robin in the yellow Sprite. The MGB still with its original 2-litre engine. And of course this was the model into which MG put the 3.5-litre Rover engine, the MGB GT V8. And away goes the orange Sprite, this time in the hands of John Tewson. And David Slade in the MGB finishes with a 64.27. John Tewson's orange Sprite wriggles its way from Orchard up to Torres. It is road registered, as you can see. Whether they drive it here or bring it on a trailer, we don't know. We have a time for David Slade of 64.27. That'll be in the MGB GT. Orange Sprite disappears towards semicircle, and on the line is Lynne Gilbert in the little 600cc OMS Hornet. She had a harmless little spin at Pardon on her first run, if you remember, which did no harm at all either to her or the car, but cost her a failed run. Let's hope Lynne keeps it on the island this time. She's not hanging around. Chris Howard Harris. Oh, I missed that. But she's done a slight whoopsie on the way into Pardon this time. So poor old Lynne is not having the most successful of afternoons. Gravity enables her to reverse the car. I hope the engine's still running and enables her to continue up the hill. The clock is still running, but she won't want to know that. Here's a rerun of, yes, what a shame. It's so easy on a wet track, heavy braking, the back wheels lock, and round you go. She's got to get it in, get the engine running, get it into gear. Doesn't have a handbrake, of course, and doesn't want to rest it on the Armco. Let's hope she doesn't. Marshall's ought to be running to her aid, but Marshall's, well, it's a version of rushing, isn't it? But we do need to say a big thank you to our marshals. They do a great job. They're well trained. It's a great way of getting involved in hill climbing and motor racing. And so I think the marshals just need to stop her rolling backwards so that Lynne can shove it in gear, assuming that the engine is still running. I think they're going to turn around and allow Lynne to coast back down the hill. Somebody has very kindly brought some fruitcake to the start line hut. So if I'm slightly muffled, it's because I'm munching on delicious fruitcake. Thank you to whoever brought it. I told you briefly about Tico Martini and the little Martini Special, which got banned because it was too fast and too small. Then a few years later, in the 80s, Dick Foden and Phil Jeffries turned up with effectively a Grand Prix go-kart at I think Chelsea Walsh Hill climb, and frightened everybody by going up the hill in 28 seconds, beating a lot of the big cars and causing a lot of frowns amongst the establishment. So the establishment quickly imposed a minimum wheelbase length, and I think Dick rang Motorsport UK or the RAC and said, what do you mean by wheelbase? And they said, the distance between the centre line of the front wheels and the centre line of the back wheels has got to be a minimum of whatever it was. So Dick and Phil went off and they built a little trailer with two wheels, which they hooked onto the back of the go-kart, which meant that the distance from the front wheels to the back was within the limits, and enabled them to continue. But unfortunately, I remember watching the trailer bouncing around at the back of the Trackstar to a dangerous degree. So very quickly they modified the regulations that you couldn't tow a trailer. But it was great fun watching them beating the regulations. So Lynne is back in the paddock. David Love is here. He is off the line in this very early Allard K1 Sport with its 4-litre V8, probably a Mercury. Slides it round Orchard. The famous Allard waterfall grill. David Lovis has had this car for a number of years. Often we have a class here at Prescott for the Allard Owners Club. Get a number of them along. They're great to see. I was at junior school with the son of Max Faulkner, who won the Open Golf Championship in 1950 or so. And I remember he had an Allard saloon and used to come to school and pick up his son and take him out for lunch. Now then, at Burgess in the wonderful Type 51 Bugatti, making all the right noises for Prescott. The Bugatti Owners Club been here since 1938, been in existence since 1929. I'm not sure whether the UK Bugatti Owners Club was the first Bugatti Owners Club when it was founded in 1929, but now of course there are Bugatti Owners Clubs all over the world, particularly in Europe, in France and Germany, and obviously in the United States as well. But this is the home of the Bugatti Owners Club UK, and lots of events here celebrating Bugatti. And indeed, we've got the Bugatti Trust, the building just the other side of the start line is the Bugatti Trust, which contains some really interesting archive and models and examples of Bugattis. It's a great place to visit. You can visit pretty much any time during the week. They welcome visitors, and if you want to find out more about Bugatti, the design and history of Bugatti cars, Bugatti Trust is the place to go. It's a very artistic family. Ettores' brother, Carlo, was a great artist, a great sculptor, particularly of animals and furniture. One of the Bugatti brothers produced wonderfully exotic furniture. They were, of course, an Italian family of Italian origin, but based in Molsheim in Alsace, Alsatia. Now then, action on the start line. It's Peter Tatham and the OMS. Good start with a minimum of wheel spin, 2.89. Slight squirm as he changed gear before the bridge, but no harm done. Very quick, 78 around Orchard. This will be a quick run. Can he threaten Einon Price, who was, first run was in the 44, low 44, I think it was a 44.01. It was a 44.13. Pete's first run was a 52.69, so I don't think he's in a position to threaten Einon. But he's having a nice run, rounding semicircle. 50.67, so nearly into the 40s. Murray Wakeham is on the line, had one slightly false start, but the rear wheels didn't cross the line, didn't stall the engine, so off he goes for a second go. Pete Tatham, a 50.67, which is about a 2-second improvement over his first run. Certainly the hill is slightly drier, but it's nothing like as grippy as it can be. 64 at bridge for Murray Wakeham in the little 1 litre OMS with its carbon fibre tub. You can still go to Steve Owen and either choose to have a space frame chassis or a carbon fibre chassis. Of course, the space frame tends to be for the smaller engines and less expensive than a full house carbon fibre tub. Can Murray do anything about Pete Tatham's 50.67? No, his first run was in the 59, so he's some way off. .95, a 2.5 second improvement. Edward Tyack in the Nike takes off very gently, but a good 64 feet, 3.26. Ken Nichols, who built these cars, died a few years ago. He was still working until he finally dropped. But a great life, and very productive. Here's this really fascinating Italian Lancia Aurelius special with the V6 Lancia engine just behind Dominic, and then a little drive shaft all the way to the Aurelia transaxle. Space frame chassis made by the gentleman who built the car and used some Lancia parts in the suspension. Used as many as he could, and I'm sure had a lot of fun competing in this car in Italy. Off the line goes Mike Marshall, highly experienced competitor. He's had this lovely Type 35 Bugatti for a number of years and always very quick. But it, as you can see, it's road registered. Chuck some lights and mudguards on it. You can legally drive them on the road. For hill climbing, of course, we have to run silencers nowadays, so some people put silence, well, Mark Walker particularly, put silencers on to compete and then took the silencers off when he drove home in his 1912 Grand Prix Peugeot. So Mike Marshall heads for the finish. Steve Thomas in this really interesting little TVR Vixen on his way. Mike on the Type 35B is finished with 65.75. And here's the OMS again, Chris Howard Harris, which has disgraced itself a couple of times in the hands of Lynne Gilbert, but no harm done. And here's Chris sharing this 600cc OMS. TVR Vixen's done a good time, 60.5. Chris chucks it into part and manages not to slide it too much. What happens at S's, we'll see. Out of S's very, very quickly, using all the road but no dramas at all. This will be a good quick run, I think. Let's look at the time. 50.7, good time in the OMS. Here's Einon Price, fastest time of the first runs in 44.13. So he's buttoned up fastest, best time of day, but here's his second run. I guess he'll be keen to go quicker than his first run. It's slightly drier than it was then. He's not hanging around under the bridge at 85. That's very quick indeed. Oh, gets it safely round. Orchard, late braking for Ettores. Gets the apex nicely 2/3 of the way around Ettores. Heavy braking again for Pardon. Clouds seem to be coming down as well. Can he get it into the 43s? I think his time this morning was the quickest time this weekend, because he actually was fastest time of day yesterday. No, 43, yeah, 43.72. Great, well done, Einon. He will do a well-deserved tour of honor, I guess. And I don't think we've got any more cars to come to the line, which means that Einon Price's 43.72 is the last competitive run at Prescott this year, just as the rain comes pouring down again. So as always, huge thanks to everybody involved on putting on a competitive event at Prescott under the worst of conditions. Our team in the office have worked wonders. Our marshals have bravely stood out, rain or shine. Our team on the start line have controlled things nicely, and particularly a thank you to Rich Danby, who is responsible for setting up and running this live stream. And I'm so glad that it's appreciated by people all over the world. You can still pick up previous live streams from Prescott on YouTube and on Facebook, but here are our top results of the day. Einon Price, 44.07, and then 43.72. Pete Tatham, 50.67. Chris Howard Harris, bottom step of the podium with a 50.7. Rodney Isles in the Alpha 4C, good run, 51.55. Einon on his way to his Tour of Honour. Paul Howells in the yellow Porsche, 53.12. Mike Bainbridge in the Ensign, 53.47. Rupert Marks bravely in the Can-Am McLaren, 53 something. It's gone, but let's concentrate on Einon. He wishes there were 1,000 spectators all waving and cheering, but he can imagine them. Meantime, he's got spectators worldwide standing up and cheering. Our marshals are doing the same. It's a great honour to do a Tour of Honour at Prescott. I've done it twice when I've achieved best time of day here at Prescott. It's a great feeling. So have a good autumn and a good winter wherever you are, or if you're in Australia, a good summer. Hope you don't have a repeat of the horrible bushfires that ravaged Australia earlier in the year. Hill climbing will start again in April 2021, as long as, well, with spectators hopefully, if we can defeat this horrible COVID-19. In the meantime, it's a fond farewell from Chris Druitt at Prescott, and I look forward to talking to everybody again next year. Many thanks for everything. Bye now.